Doctors, engineers, and executives assume high salaries guarantee financial security. But structurally, these top-tier earners are frequently the most vulnerable to absolute financial ruin. In 1923, a group of the world's highest earners and most powerful financiers gathered at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. The attendees included Charles Schwab, the head of the largest independent steel company, Samuel Insull, president of the world's largest utility, and Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange. These men controlled vast industrial empires and generated immense personal wealth. 25 years later, their wealth had completely evaporated. Schwab died broke after living on borrowed money. Insull died a fugitive in a foreign land. Whitney served time in Sing Sing prison. The absolute magnitude of a paycheck is mathematically irrelevant. Without a structural framework designed specifically to retain and compound capital, high income simply scales up the eventual collapse. This systemic processing error, where high income fails to produce wealth, is commonly known as the rat race. This equation represents the rat race mathematically. It shows the change in wages is directly proportional to the change in expenditures. An increase on the left side instantly forces an equal increase on the right side. Here is how that loop functions in practice. A W-2 paycheck arrives. Almost immediately, a perfectly matched wave of fixed expenses, a larger mortgage, a new car loan, an upgraded lifestyle rises to consume it. The capital drains out as quickly as it enters. Academic systems train professionals for credential-driven security, trading advanced degrees for higher salaries within that exact loop. Escaping it requires a completely different objective: asset-driven autonomy. You cannot solve a capital retention problem by working harder at a better job. Escaping this loop requires treating wealth as a systems engineering problem. Traditional, generally accepted accounting principles define assets based on static market value. Under this model, your home, your car, and your watch are listed as assets. This definition misleads high earners into thinking they are building wealth when they are actually accumulating debt. This side-by-side comparison shows the difference. On the left is a traditional static balance sheet. On the right is a dynamic cash flow pipeline, separated into income, expense, asset, and liability zones. This operational model tracks the actual physics of your money. Looking at the right side, an asset is strictly defined as a structural element that routes positive cash flow into your possession. Its perceived market value is irrelevant. It only qualifies as an asset if it actively produces income. Conversely, a liability is a structural element that routes cash out of your possession. If it requires capital to maintain, it belongs here. We can now map how different socioeconomic groups route their capital. In the poor pipeline, capital enters through wages and exits straight through living expenses like rent and food. It completely bypasses the balance sheet. True financial autonomy relies on recognizing the actual velocity and direction of your cash flow, rather than stockpiling items with a high theoretical resale value. This brings us to the most deeply held financial belief among educated professionals: the assumption that their primary home is their greatest asset. Apply the strict operational cash flow test to a primary residence. Every month, it requires mortgage payments, property taxes, home insurance premiums, utilities, and ongoing maintenance. Because these elements mandate continuous capital outflow, a primary residence operates mathematically as a liability. This diagram illustrates the middle-class pipeline. Professionals use their increased wages to purchase liabilities, like large homes and cars, that they mistakenly label as assets. Capital flows from income, loops downward into these fake assets, and drains completely out through the expense zone. This structural misrouting permanently traps the middle class. They are forced to maintain active wage labor just to service the debt of the liabilities they bought to look wealthy. Misclassifying a liability as an asset guarantees participation in the rat race. You end up exchanging your lifetime of labor to maintain depreciating infrastructure. To understand how to actually build an asset column, we have to look at the core processing error most professionals make regarding their careers, perfectly illustrated by Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's. In 1974, Kroc spoke to MBA students at the University of Texas. Over beers afterward, he asked them what business they thought he was in. The students laughed, stating the obvious: he was in the hamburger business. Kroc shocked them by claiming he wasn't. Kroc explained his true model. Selling hamburger franchise systems was his profession. His actual business was acquiring the physical real estate underneath every single location. That distinction applies directly to you. Your profession is the daily active labor you perform to fund your expenses. Your business is the systematic acquisition of income-generating assets that work independently of your time. Robert Kiyosaki learned this as a child through the zero-wage constraint. When his friend's father forced him to work in a convenience store for zero pay, it severed the psychological link between his labor and an hourly wage. Without a paycheck to rely on, the boys had to engineer a systemic asset instead, creating a profitable comic book lending library out of discarded inventory. Realizing this independence requires a psychological split, viewing your job title as a temporary tool while focusing your effort on constructing a self-sustaining asset column. The final legal component of this wealth architecture is the utilization of corporate structures to shield capital from taxation. The standard employee operates on a strict capital sequence: earn, tax, spend. This sequence mathematically cripples wealth building. The government taxes your gross earnings right off the top, before a single dollar can be deducted for your personal lifestyle expenses or investments. The wealthy use corporate entities to completely invert that sequence, changing it to earn, spend, tax. This diagram breaks down the mechanics. On the top flow, the employee earns. A large piece is immediately removed for taxes, and they spend what's left. On the bottom flow, a corporate entity earns, deducts valid business expenses entirely pre-tax, and only pays taxes on the small fraction of capital that remains. For concrete proof of this sequence inversion, look at the IRS Section 179 vehicle deduction. By purchasing a vehicle weighing over 6,000 pounds through a business, the owner can deduct a massive portion of the purchase price from their taxable income. They are effectively funding a luxury lifestyle with pre-tax dollars. This shielded capital is immediately redeployed to acquire more income-producing assets. Corporate structuring alters the velocity of wealth. It legally intercepts capital bound for the government and redirects it directly into private asset columns. This brings us to the final wealthy pipeline diagram. Here, capital flows directly into the asset zone. Those assets generate a thick, continuous return flow back up into the income zone, creating a powerful, self-sustaining loop. A corporate structure serves as a protective barrier around this loop, blocking capital intended for taxes and feeding it back into the engine. This represents the mathematical threshold for true financial autonomy. Passive income must exceed total expenses. Achieving this mathematical state permanently severs your dependency on active wage labor. You no longer work for money, your system does. A high W-2 salary is extremely fragile. It vanishes the moment you stop working or the corporation downsizes. A properly engineered cash-flowing asset column is anti-fragile. It scales and endures regardless of your physical presence. Financial autonomy is not achieved by climbing the corporate ladder. It is achieved by engineering, legally shielding, and ultimately owning the underlying economic engine.